William's world shattered the moment he saw it. The ring, his wife's ring, gleaming on a stranger's finger as she fed his daughter with impossible tenderness. 3 years of grief had taught him that miracles were cruel jokes. Yet here sat Grace, a 22-year-old waitress, wearing the very symbol of his destroyed happiness. Lily's laughter, a sound he'd forgotten existed, filled the small diner as this mysterious young woman spoke to her in ways that bypassed words entirely. The billionaire father who had built empires couldn't build a bridge to his own child's heart, but somehow this stranger had found the key. Subscribe to witness how the impossible becomes the only truth that matters. The rain hammered against the diner's windows like accusations William couldn't escape, each drop a reminder of the storm that had been raging inside him for 3 years. He sat in the corner booth, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the worn vinyl seats, watching his daughter Lily struggle with her fork as she always did. Her cerebral palsy made every movement a negotiation between intention and ability, and William felt the familiar knot of helplessness tighten in his chest. The other patrons glanced their way with that mixture of pity and discomfort he'd grown to despise, their whispered conversations creating a wall of judgment around their table. He'd brought Lily here because she'd asked, one of the few clear requests she'd made in months. But now he questioned his decision as he watched her frustration mount with each failed attempt to bring food to her mouth. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects, casting harsh shadows that made everything feel more desperate than it already was. William reached across the table to help her, but Lily pulled away with a sound of distress that cut through him like broken glass. The diner smelled of coffee and fried food, ordinary scents that somehow felt foreign to a man who'd spent the last 3 years in sterile hospital rooms and therapy centers. William's empire of hotels and real estate developments meant nothing here, in this small space where his daughter's simple desire for independence became an insurmountable mountain. He watched other families eating together with an ease that seemed impossible, their casual conversations and shared laughter highlighting the silence that had settled between him and Lily like a permanent winter. The waitresses moved between tables with practiced efficiency, their smiles professional but distant, and William wondered if this was what normal looked like. This world where people connected without the weight of tragedy pressing down on every interaction. His phone buzzed with messages from his assistant about board meetings and acquisition deals, but the numbers and negotiations that once consumed his thoughts felt meaningless when faced with his daughter's struggle to simply eat a meal. The leather booth creaked under his weight as he shifted, trying to find a position that didn't make him feel like he was intruding on his own child's space. Lily's dark hair fell across her face as she concentrated, her small hands trembling with the effort of coordination that most people took for granted. William remembered when Sarah used to braid that hair, her gentle fingers working magic while she sang softly, and the memory hit him like a physical blow. 3 years since the accident, 3 years since cancer had stolen his wife and left him floundering in a world he no longer understood, trying to be both mother and father to a child whose needs exceeded his capabilities. The doctors had explained Lily's condition with clinical precision, but they couldn't explain how to bridge the growing distance between them, how to translate his love into something she could feel and understand. He'd hired the best therapists, bought every adaptive device money could purchase, but none of it seemed to matter when faced with moments like this, when his daughter's frustration became a mirror reflecting his own inadequacy. The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows, and William felt as though he were drowning in plain sight, surrounded by the ordinary world but unable to reach it. The diner's warmth felt oppressive against his skin, a stark contrast to the cold emptiness that had taken residence in his chest since Sarah's death. William's hands, which had signed billion-dollar deals without trembling, shook slightly as he reached for his coffee cup, the simple ceramic feeling foreign against his palms. He'd built his fortune by reading people, by understanding what they wanted before they knew it themselves. but his own daughter remained a mystery that no amount of money or influence could solve. The other customers seemed to exist in a different dimension, one where children laughed easily and parents knew instinctively how to comfort and connect, while he sat trapped behind an invisible wall of grief and uncertainty. Lily made another frustrated sound, and William felt the familiar surge of panic that accompanied these moments, the terror that he was failing her in ways that couldn't be measured or fixed. The fluorescent light above their table flickered intermittently, casting shifting shadows that seemed to mock his attempts at normalcy, reminding him that some things remained broken no matter how much wealth you possessed. The weight of his wedding ring felt heavier than usual, a golden reminder of promises made and broken by circumstances beyond his control. William twisted it unconsciously, a habit he'd developed in the months after Sarah's funeral, when the simple act of breathing had felt like betrayal. He'd kept her engagement ring in a safe deposit box, unable to look at it without feeling the ground shift beneath his feet. But sometimes he wondered if holding on to it was just another form of self-torture. The diner's background noise, clinking silverware, muffled conversations, the hiss of the coffee machine, created a soundtrack of normalcy that felt increasingly foreign to his ears. Lily's breathing had become labored with frustration, and William recognized the signs that preceded one of her meltdowns, those moments when her disability and his inadequacy collided in ways that left them both exhausted and defeated. He glanced around desperately, looking for an escape route or a miracle, anything that might prevent the scene he could feel building like pressure in the air before a storm. The rain outside seemed to intensify, as if the weather itself was responding to the tension at their table. William's reflection in the rain-streaked window showed a man he barely recognized, hollow-eyed and haunted, wearing expensive clothes like armor that no longer protected him from anything that mattered. The billionaire, who had once commanded boardrooms and negotiated with world leaders, now sat helpless before a 10-year-old struggle with a simple meal, his success meaningless in the face of his daughter's needs. He thought about the empty mansion waiting for them, with its perfectly appointed rooms and state-of-the-art accessibility features that somehow made their isolation feel even more complete. The silence between them had grown so profound that even Lily's small sounds of frustration felt like shouts in the quiet space they'd created around themselves. William's chest tightened with the familiar sensation of drowning in plain sight, surrounded by life but unable to participate in it, watching his daughter slip further away from him with each passing day. The diner's warmth pressed against him like a judgment, highlighting the cold distance that had settled between them like an unbridgeable chasm, and he wondered if this was what the rest of their lives would look like. Two people sharing space but never truly connecting, bound by blood and tragedy, but separated by everything that mattered. Grace appeared at their table like an answer to a prayer William hadn't known he was making, her presence shifting the very air around them with a gentleness that seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper than mere kindness. She couldn't have been more than 22, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and eyes the color of warm honey that seemed to see straight through to the heart of things. Her uniform was standard diner fare, a pale blue dress with a white apron, but she wore it with a dignity that transformed the ordinary fabric into something almost sacred. William watched, transfixed as she knelt beside Lily's chair without hesitation, bringing herself to his daughter's eye level with a naturalness that spoke of genuine understanding rather than practiced sympathy. The fluorescent light seemed to soften around her, casting a glow that made the harsh diner environment feel suddenly warm and welcoming. Her smile wasn't the forced brightness he'd grown accustomed to from well-meaning strangers, but something real and unguarded that seemed to recognize Lily as a complete person rather than a collection of limitations. "Hi there, beautiful," Grace said softly, her voice carrying a musical quality that made Lily's head turn with interest rather than the usual wariness she showed strangers. William felt his breath catch as he watched his daughter's face transform, the frustration melting away to be replaced by something he hadn't seen in months, genuine curiosity and the beginning of trust. Grace's hands moved with practiced ease as she assessed the situation, her fingers gentle but confident as she adjusted Lily's grip on the fork, not taking over, but simply offering support in a way that preserved his daughter's dignity. The other diners seemed to fade into background noise as William found himself leaning forward, drawn into this unexpected moment of connection that felt like watching a miracle unfold in real time. Grace's presence created a bubble of calm around their table, transforming the space from a battlefield of frustration into something that felt almost sacred. Her movements were unhurried and deliberate, each gesture conveying a respect for Lily's autonomy that most adults failed to understand, treating his daughter as a person worthy of patience rather than an object of pity. The way Grace positioned herself spoke of experience that went beyond mere training, suggesting a deep understanding of disability that came from lived experience rather than textbook knowledge. William noticed how she never spoke over Lily or around her, but directly to her, maintaining eye contact and waiting for responses, even when they came in forms that others might not recognize as communication. Her hands were small and graceful, with short, practical nails that suggested someone who worked with purpose rather than vanity, and William found himself studying them as they guided his daughter through the simple act of eating with a patience that seemed infinite. The diner's harsh lighting couldn't diminish the warmth that seemed to radiate from Grace's very being, creating an atmosphere of safety that allowed Lily to relax in ways William hadn't seen since before Sarah's death. Her voice carried undertones of genuine affection as she spoke to Lily, not the patronizing sweetness that so many people used with disabled children, but the kind of authentic warmth that suggested she saw past the diagnosis to the person underneath. The transformation in his daughter was so immediate and profound that William felt tears threatening, overwhelmed by the realization that this stranger was accomplishing what he'd been unable to do for 3 years. Grace's approach to helping Lily eat was like watching an artist at work, each movement purposeful and respectful, never rushing or forcing, but simply creating space for success to happen naturally. William observed the way she anticipated Lily's needs without hovering, offering support that felt empowering rather than diminishing, and he found himself taking mental notes on techniques that seemed to come to her as naturally as breathing. The other customers in the diner seemed to sense something special happening at their table, their conversations growing quieter, as if they too were drawn into the gentle magic Grace was weaving around his daughter. Her laughter was soft and genuine when Lily managed a particularly successful bite, celebrating the small victory with an enthusiasm that felt proportionate and real rather than exaggerated or condescending. The fluorescent bulb above their table had stopped its irritating flicker, as if even the electrical systems were responding to the peace Grace brought to their corner of the world. William felt something loosening in his chest, a tension he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten it was there, as he watched his daughter engage with another human being in ways that reminded him she was still the bright, curious child she'd always been, beneath the layers of medical complexity. The rain outside had gentled to a soft patter against the windows, no longer sounding like accusations, but more like a lullaby that provided the perfect soundtrack to this unexpected moment of grace. William found himself studying Grace's profile as she worked with Lily, noting the concentration in her expression and the way her entire being seemed focused on his daughter's needs with an intensity that spoke of genuine care rather than professional obligation. Her movements had a rhythm to them, a dance of assistance that flowed so naturally it seemed choreographed by some benevolent force that understood exactly what Lily needed in this moment. The diner's coffee-scented air felt lighter somehow, as if Grace's presence had lifted some invisible weight that had been pressing down on their table since they'd arrived. William realized he was holding his breath afraid that any movement or sound from him might break the spell that was allowing his daughter to experience something approaching normalcy for the first time in months. The simple act of watching Lily eat with assistance that felt like partnership rather than charity was healing something in William that he hadn't even realized was broken, showing him possibilities he'd stopped believing in. Grace's attention to Lily was so complete and focused that William felt like he was witnessing something sacred, a connection that transcended the usual boundaries between stranger and family, caregiver and recipient. The way she spoke to his daughter, with respect and genuine interest, reminded him of how Sarah used to interact with Lily, seeing the whole person rather than just the disability, and the comparison brought both comfort and a sharp pang of loss. Her hands moved with a sureness that suggested this wasn't the first time she'd helped someone with similar challenges. Yet there was nothing routine or mechanical about her approach. Each gesture seemed tailored specifically to Lily's needs and personality. The diner's background noise faded to a gentle hum as William found himself completely absorbed in watching this young woman work what could only be described as magic, transforming his daughter's struggle into something that looked almost like joy. Grace's presence seemed to create a protective bubble around their table, shielding them from the curious stares and whispered comments that usually accompanied their public outings. Allowing Lily to simply be a child, enjoying a meal rather than a spectacle to be observed and pitied. The fluorescent lights above cast a warm glow that seemed to emanate from Grace herself, transforming the harsh diner environment into something that felt almost like home. It was then that William saw it, the ring that stopped his heart and rewrote everything he thought he knew about coincidence and fate. The simple gold band with its distinctive Celtic knot pattern caught the diner's fluorescent light as Grace reached for a napkin, and William felt the world tilt on its axis as recognition hit him like a physical blow. That ring had been Sarah's most treasured possession, inherited from her grandmother and worn every day until the cancer treatments made her fingers too swollen to bear its weight. He'd placed it in a safety deposit box after the funeral, unable to look at it without feeling like he was drowning in memories. Yet here it was, gleaming on the finger of a stranger who was showing his daughter the kind of care he'd thought died with his wife. The impossibility of it made his vision blur and his hands shake as he gripped the edge of the table, trying to anchor himself in a reality that suddenly felt as fragile as spun glass. Grace continued helping Lily with her meal, completely unaware that she was wearing a piece of William's shattered heart, a tangible connection to the woman whose absence had hollowed out his world. The ring seemed to pulse with its own light, drawing his attention like a beacon in the storm of his confusion and disbelief. William's mind raced through possibilities, each more unlikely than the last, as he tried to make sense of what his eyes were telling him. The ring was unique, a family heirloom that Sarah's grandmother had commissioned from an Irish craftsman decades ago, with intricate details that couldn't be replicated or coincidentally duplicated. He'd memorized every curve and line during the countless hours he'd spent holding Sarah's hand through chemotherapy sessions. The ring, a constant reminder of the love that had sustained them through the darkest period of their lives. The way the light caught the Celtic knots was exactly as he remembered. The slight wear on one side, where Sarah had habitually twisted it when she was nervous or deep in thought, and William felt his chest constrict with the impossibility of seeing it here, now, on the hand of someone who couldn't possibly have any connection to his family. Grace's movements remained gentle and focused on Lily, but William found himself studying her face with new intensity, searching for any resemblance to Sarah or any clue that might explain this cosmic impossibility. The diner around them seemed to fade into irrelevance as William grappled with the implications of what he was seeing, his rational mind warring with the evidence of his own eyes. The ring's presence on Grace's finger felt like a message from beyond the grave, a sign that Sarah was somehow still watching over them, still finding ways to care for Lily, even from whatever realm claimed her now. William's throat tightened with emotion as he watched Grace's patient ministrations, seeing in her movements an echo of his wife's gentle touch and infinite patience with their daughter's needs. The impossibility of the situation made him question his own sanity, wondering if grief had finally driven him to hallucinations. But the ring remained stubbornly real, catching the light with each of Grace's movements as she helped Lily navigate her meal. The other diners continued their conversations and meals, oblivious to the miracle unfolding at table 12, where a dead woman's ring had somehow found its way to the exact person who could provide the care and connection that Lily desperately needed. William felt tears threatening as he considered the implications, that perhaps love really did transcend death, that Sarah had somehow orchestrated this meeting from whatever place she now inhabited, sending an angel in the form of a young waitress to bridge the gap between father and daughter that grief had created. Grace's unconscious grace with the ring, the way she wore it as naturally as if it had always belonged to her, suggested a connection that went deeper than mere coincidence or theft. William studied her profile as she worked with Lily, noting the way her auburn hair caught the light in shades that reminded him of autumn leaves, the same colors Sarah had loved to paint during the brief periods when treatment allowed her the strength to hold a brush. The ring seemed to enhance Grace's natural warmth, as if it carried some residual power from its previous owner, some ability to channel love and healing that transcended the physical boundaries of life and death. William's hands trembled as he reached for his coffee cup, his mind struggling to process the impossibility of what he was witnessing, while his heart recognized something profound and inexplicable happening before his eyes. The diner's mundane atmosphere felt charged with significance, as if the universe had chosen this ordinary place to reveal extraordinary truths about the persistence of love and the mysterious ways that healing could manifest in the darkest moments of human experience. The way Grace wore the ring, with unconscious reverence, as if she understood its significance even without knowing its history, made William wonder if some objects carried the emotional imprints of their previous owners, transferring not just physical presence but spiritual essence from one person to another. He watched her hands move with Sarah-like gentleness as she helped Lily, and the similarity was so profound it made his chest ache with a mixture of grief and impossible hope. The ring seemed to glow with its own inner light, transforming Grace's simple gestures into something that felt sacramental, as if she were channeling Sarah's love through the physical connection of the inherited jewelry. William found himself leaning forward, drawn by the magnetic pull of this impossible coincidence that felt too perfect to be random, too meaningful to be explained by the cold logic that had governed his life since Sarah's death. The fluorescent lights above their table seemed to dim and brighten in rhythm with his heartbeat, creating an atmosphere that felt suspended between the ordinary world and something far more mysterious and profound. Grace's complete focus on Lily, combined with the presence of Sarah's ring on her finger, created a tableau that felt like a painting come to life, a representation of love transcending death to continue caring for those left behind. William's rational mind catalogued all the reasons this couldn't be happening, all the logical explanations that might account for the ring's presence, but his heart recognized something that defied explanation, a connection that spoke to the deepest parts of his being about the nature of love and loss and the possibility of healing. The diner's ordinary sounds, the clink of silverware, the murmur of conversation, the hiss of the coffee machine, seemed to fade into a gentle symphony that provided the perfect soundtrack to this moment of impossible recognition. William felt as though he were witnessing a miracle in real time, watching as the universe revealed its capacity for mystery and magic in the most unexpected places, using a simple piece of jewelry to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, between despair and hope, between a father's inadequacy and a daughter's need for connection. William's composure, carefully constructed over 3 years of public appearances and business meetings where he'd hidden his grief behind professional competence, finally cracked like ice under sudden pressure. The sight of Grace wearing Sarah's ring while caring for Lily with such intuitive understanding was more than his carefully guarded heart could bear, and he felt tears spilling down his cheeks before he could stop them. The other diners seemed to exist in a different dimension as William struggled with the overwhelming realization that this moment felt like a gift from Sarah herself, a sign that love really could transcend death to continue protecting and nurturing those left behind. Grace looked up from helping Lily and noticed his tears, her expression shifting from gentle concentration to immediate concern, and William saw in her eyes the same depth of compassion that had first drawn him to Sarah all those years ago. The ring caught the light again as Grace reached across the table, her instinct to comfort overriding any professional boundaries, and William felt the last of his emotional walls crumbling under the weight of this impossible kindness. The diner's fluorescent lights seemed to blur and dance through his tears, creating halos around Grace's face that made her look even more like the angel she was proving herself to be. Her touch on his hand was gentle but grounding, anchoring him to this moment of profound connection when everything he'd believed about loss and healing was being rewritten before his eyes. "Are you okay?" Grace asked softly, her voice carrying the same musical quality that had first captured Lily's attention. And William found himself nodding even as more tears fell, overwhelmed by the simple fact that someone was asking about his well-being rather than his daughter's for the first time in years. The concern in her honey-colored eyes was genuine and immediate, not the polite inquiry of a service worker, but the authentic care of someone who recognized pain and wanted to ease it. And William felt something in his chest that had been frozen since Sarah's death begin to thaw. Lily looked between them with an expression of curiosity rather than distress, as if Grace's presence had created a safe space where even her father's tears didn't feel threatening or overwhelming. And William marveled at this young woman's ability to hold space for multiple people's emotions without becoming overwhelmed herself. The ring on Grace's finger seemed to pulse with warmth as she maintained contact with his hand, and William wondered if he was imagining the sense that Sarah was somehow present in this moment, using this stranger's kindness to reach across the veil and comfort him. The diner around them had grown quieter, as if the other patrons sensed something sacred happening at their table, something that deserved reverence and protection from the ordinary noise of daily life. Grace's response to his emotional breakdown was so natural and unforced that William realized she'd probably comforted many people in her young life, suggesting a depth of experience with pain and healing that seemed impossible for someone her age. She didn't try to fix his tears or rush him through his grief, but simply held space for his emotion with a patience that reminded him powerfully of Sarah's approach to difficult moments, when she would sit quietly beside him and let him feel whatever needed to be felt. The way Grace continued to help Lily, even while attending to his distress, showed a remarkable ability to multitask emotionally, caring for both father and daughter, with an ease that spoke of natural gifts rather than learned skills. William found himself studying her face through his tears, searching for any clue about who she was and how she'd come to possess not just Sarah's ring, but also her intuitive understanding of what his family needed. The impossibility of the situation made him feel like he was living in a dream, but the warmth of Grace's hand on his and the sound of Lily's contented eating grounded him in the reality of this miraculous moment. The fluorescent light above their table had steadied into a warm, consistent glow that seemed to bless this unexpected trinity of connection and healing. "I'm sorry," William managed to whisper, his voice rough with emotion as he tried to regain some semblance of composure. But Grace shook her head gently, her expression conveying that there was nothing to apologize for, that tears were simply another form of communication that she understood and accepted. The ring on her finger caught his attention again, and William found himself staring at it with a mixture of wonder and desperate need to understand how this impossible thing had come to pass. How a piece of his dead wife had found its way to exactly the person who could help heal his broken family. Grace seemed to sense his focus on the ring, glancing down at her hand with a soft smile that suggested the jewelry held special meaning for her as well, though she couldn't possibly know its true significance or the way its presence was rewriting William's understanding of fate and coincidence. The diner's coffee-scented air felt charged with possibility as William struggled to find words for questions that seemed too large and impossible to voice, wondering how he could ask this stranger about the ring without sounding insane or invasive. Lily made a small sound of satisfaction as she successfully managed another bite with Grace's help, and the simple joy in that sound made William's tears flow harder, overwhelmed by the realization that his daughter was experiencing something approaching happiness for the first time in months. The weight of 3 years' worth of suppressed grief and desperate hope crashed over William like a wave, leaving him gasping and raw in the fluorescent-lit booth, while Grace held space for his breakdown with the same gentle competence she'd shown in helping Lily. The ring seemed to glow brighter with each of his tears, as if it were absorbing his pain and transforming it into something more bearable, and William found himself believing in possibilities he'd dismissed as fantasy since Sarah's death. Grace's presence felt like a bridge between the world of the living and whatever realm claimed his wife, a tangible connection that made the impossible seem not just possible, but inevitable. As if this meeting had been orchestrated by forces beyond human understanding, the other diners had returned to their conversations and meals, but William felt as though he and Grace and Lily existed in a bubble outside normal time and space, where miracles could unfold over coffee and pie in a small-town diner. The fluorescent lights seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat as William struggled to process the magnitude of what was happening. The way this young woman's simple act of kindness was healing wounds he'd thought would never stop bleeding. Grace's hand remained steady on his, anchoring him to this moment of impossible grace, while Lily continued eating with a contentment that spoke of feeling truly cared for. And William knew that nothing would ever be the same after this encounter with the angel who wore his dead wife's ring. Grace's eyes held depths that seemed far older than her 22 years, suggesting a soul that had been touched by loss and had chosen compassion over bitterness, healing over hardness, and William found himself wondering what sorrows had shaped her into someone capable of such profound empathy. The ring on her finger seemed to connect them across dimensions of experience and understanding, creating a bond that transcended the ordinary boundaries between strangers and family, between the living and the dead, between despair and hope. The diner's mundane atmosphere had been transformed into something sacred by Grace's presence and the impossible appearance of Sarah's ring, turning a simple meal into a moment of revelation that would reshape everything William thought he knew about love, loss, and the mysterious ways that healing could manifest in the darkest hours of human experience. Lily's laughter, soft and genuine, filled the space between them as Grace made a gentle joke about the food, and the sound was like music to William's ears, a reminder that joy was still possible even in the aftermath of devastating loss. The fluorescent light above their table seemed to bless this unlikely trinity, as William realized that sometimes angels came disguised as waitresses, wearing the jewelry of the dead and carrying the power to resurrect hope in hearts that had given up on miracles. Subscribe to discover the impossible truth behind the ring and witness how a chance encounter becomes the miracle that changes everything. The silence in William's study felt heavier than the mahogany walls that surrounded him, each second stretching like an eternity as he stared at the photograph of Elena on his desk. Her smile seemed to mock him now, beautiful and serene, holding secrets he had never known existed. The leather chair creaked beneath his weight as he leaned forward, his fingers trembling as they traced the silver frame, remembering how she used to sit in this very room, reading to Lily while he worked late into the night. The memory felt like a knife twisting in his chest, sharp and unforgiving, because now he understood that every gentle smile, every loving gesture, every whispered promise had been built on a foundation of lies. How could the woman he had loved so completely, so blindly, have hidden an entire life from him? The question burned through his mind like acid, eating away at every cherished memory, every moment of happiness they had shared. Grace's face haunted him now, her gentle features superimposed over Eleanor's in his mind, creating a ghostly double image that made his heart race with a mixture of longing and terror. The way she had touched Lily, so naturally, so lovingly, as if some invisible thread connected them across the years and the silence that had separated them. He could still see her hands as she fed his daughter, those same delicate fingers that wore Elena's ring, moving with a grace that seemed inherited rather than learned. The resemblance was undeniable now that he allowed himself to see it, the curve of her smile, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the unconscious tilt of her head when she listened. It was as if Elena had reached across the grave to touch his life again, to remind him of all the love he had lost and all the questions that would never be answered. The weight of this revelation pressed down on him like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe, difficult to think beyond the overwhelming need to understand how this was possible. The private investigator's report lay spread across his desk like evidence of a crime, each page revealing another layer of deception that cut deeper than the last. Elena Martinez, not Elena Blackwood as he had known her, had lived an entire existence before she became his wife, a life filled with struggle and sacrifice that she had never shared with him. The documents painted a picture of a young woman working multiple jobs to support her family, sending money home to a sister who was raising a daughter alone, a daughter who would grow up to become the waitress who had unknowingly shattered his world. Grace Elena Martinez, named for the aunt she had never met, the woman who had died believing her family would be provided for, never knowing that her husband would remain ignorant of their existence. The irony was cruel and perfect, a cosmic joke that left William feeling like a fool who had been blind to the most important truth of his life. His hands shook as he reached for his phone, the device feeling impossibly heavy as he scrolled through the investigator's contact information. Every instinct screamed at him to call, to demand answers, to uncover every detail of the life Elena had hidden from him, but something deeper held him back. Perhaps it was fear. Fear of what else he might discover. Fear that the woman he had loved had been a complete stranger. Fear that his entire marriage had been built on deception. Or perhaps it was guilt. The crushing realization that while he had been living in luxury, Elena's family had been struggling, that the ring on Grace's finger might be the only valuable thing she owned, a final gift from an aunt who had tried to bridge two worlds that should never have been separated. The weight of his ignorance felt like a physical burden, pressing down on his shoulders until he could barely sit upright in his chair. Lily's laughter drifted up from the garden below, where she played with her nurse, oblivious to the storm raging in her father's heart. The sound was pure and innocent, untouched by the complexities that had suddenly invaded their carefully ordered world, and it reminded him of why none of this could remain a secret. His daughter deserved to know about Grace, deserved to understand the connection that had drawn them together in that restaurant, deserved to have the family that Elena had kept hidden from them both. The thought of telling Lily about her aunt, about the family she had never known existed, filled him with a mixture of anticipation and dread. How could he explain that the woman who had shown her such kindness was her blood, her family, when he himself was still struggling to accept the truth? How could he make sense of a situation that defied all logic and reason? The evening shadows grew longer as William sat in his study, paralyzed by the magnitude of what he had discovered, knowing that his next decision would change everything forever. Grace was out there somewhere, probably finishing her shift at the restaurant, unaware that her entire world was about to be turned upside down, unaware that the man whose daughter she had fed was the husband of the aunt she had never met. The ring on her finger connected them all in ways that seemed impossible, a golden thread that bound past and present, love and loss, truth and deception into a knot so complex that William wasn't sure it could ever be untangled. But as he looked at Elena's photograph one more time, he knew that he had no choice but to try, no choice but to reach across the chasm of years and secrets, to bring Grace into their lives, to give Lily the family she deserved, and to finally honor the promises Elena had made to people he had never known existed. The truth demanded courage, and for his daughter's sake, he would find the strength to face whatever came next. The restaurant felt different when William entered it the next evening, the familiar sounds of clinking dishes and muted conversations seeming to echo with new meaning as he searched the dining room for Grace's familiar figure. His heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird, desperate for freedom, each beat reminding him of the weight of the envelope in his jacket pocket, the investigator's report that contained the power to destroy or heal, depending on how carefully he wielded its contents. The hostess smiled at him with professional warmth, but he barely saw her, his eyes scanning every corner of the restaurant until he spotted Grace near the kitchen, her dark hair catching the light as she moved between tables with that same natural grace that had first caught his attention. She looked so young, so innocent, completely unaware that her life was about to change forever, and the sight of her made his throat tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. How do you approach someone and tell them that everything they thought they knew about their family was wrong? Grace noticed him before he could decide on his approach, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure as she recognized him from the previous evening. The smile she gave him was Elena's smile, warm and welcoming, and it hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his knees weak with the force of recognition. She moved toward him with easy confidence, her uniform crisp and professional, but there was something in her eyes that spoke of deeper currents, of a wisdom that seemed too old for her 22 years. "Mr. Blackwood?" she said, her voice carrying that same musical quality that had haunted his dreams. "I'm so glad you came back. How is Lily doing today?" The genuine concern in her tone, the way she said his daughter's name like it mattered to her, made his chest tighten with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. This young woman cared about his child, had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return, and now he was about to turn her world upside down. "She's well," he managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "Actually, she's been asking about you, about the kind lady who helped her eat." Grace's eyes softened at this, and she unconsciously touched the ring on her finger, the gesture so natural and familiar that it made William's heart skip a beat. He watched her fingers caress the golden band, remembering how Elena used to do the same thing when she was nervous or thinking deeply, and the similarity was so striking that for a moment he forgot how to breathe. "That's very sweet of her," Grace replied, her cheeks flushing with pleasure. "I've been thinking about her too. There was something so special about her, so familiar." Udun, the word hung in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed, and William knew that this was his moment, his chance to begin the conversation that would change everything. But the words stuck in his throat, too big and too dangerous to release into the world. "Grace," he said finally, her name feeling strange and right on his tongue. "I wonder if we could talk privately. There's something important I need to discuss with you." Her expression shifted slightly, curiosity mixing with concern as she glanced around the busy restaurant. "I'm working until 9, she said carefully, "but I could meet you after my shift if it's really important." The way she said it with that slight hesitation that suggested she was used to being careful around wealthy men, made him realize how this must look to her. A billionaire asking a waitress to meet him privately could mean any number of things, most of them unpleasant. "It's about your family," he said quickly, watching her face change as the words hit her. "About your Aunt Elena. I knew her, Grace. I knew her very well." The color drained from her face so quickly that he thought she might faint, and her hand flew to her throat in a gesture of shock and vulnerability that made him want to reach out and steady her. "My Aunt Elena," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the restaurant noise. "But that's impossible. She died years ago, before I was even born. My mother said she went away and never came back." The pain in her voice was raw and immediate, the wound of abandonment that had clearly never healed, and William felt his heart break for this young woman who had grown up believing she had been forgotten by the family member who had loved her most. "She didn't abandon you," he said gently, his voice thick with emotion. "She never forgot about you or your mother. She talked about you all the time, worried about you, sent money when she could." Grace's eyes filled with tears, and she pressed her hand to her mouth as if trying to hold back a sob. "That's not possible," she said, shaking her head. "We never heard from her after she left. We thought she didn't care about us anymore." The anguish in her voice made William want to gather her in his arms and tell her everything, to explain how Eleanor had loved her family but had been trapped by circumstances she couldn't control. The restaurant continued to buzz around them, other diners and staff moving through their evening routines, completely unaware of the life-changing conversation taking place in their midst. Grace stood frozen, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock, while William struggled to find the right words to continue this impossible conversation. The ring on her finger caught the light, winking like a star, and he knew that soon she would understand its true significance, would learn that she was wearing the wedding ring of a woman who had never stopped loving her family, who had carried their memory in her heart until the day she died. "Meet me at the coffee shop across the street when your shift ends," he said softly, his voice gentle but urgent. "And I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you about Eleanor, about how much she loved you, and about why you and Lily are connected in ways you never imagined." Grace nodded wordlessly, tears streaming down her face, and William knew that there was no turning back now. The truth was finally ready to be born. The coffee shop across from the restaurant felt like a sanctuary as William waited for Grace, the warm lighting and quiet atmosphere providing a stark contrast to the chaos raging in his mind. He had chosen a corner table away from the other patrons. The investigator's report spread before him like evidence in a trial that would determine the fate of 3 lives. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages, each document a piece of the puzzle that Elena had kept hidden from him, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. The birth certificate that listed Elena Martinez as Grace's aunt, the immigration records that showed Elena's arrival in the country just months before they met, the bank transfers that proved she had been sending money to her sister's family right up until her death. It was all there, a paper trail of love and sacrifice that he had been blind to for years. How had he not known? How had the woman he shared a bed with, a life with, managed to keep such a fundamental part of herself secret? Grace appeared in the doorway exactly at 9:15, her work uniform replaced by simple jeans and a sweater that made her look even younger than her 22 years. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but there was a determination in her posture that reminded him painfully of Elena when she had made up her mind about something. She moved through the coffee shop with careful steps, as if the ground beneath her feet might give way at any moment, and when she reached his table, she stood for a moment, just looking at him, her expression a mixture of hope and fear that made his chest tighten with emotion. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, rising to pull out her chair, and she nodded wordlessly as she sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The ring caught the light as she moved, and he found himself staring at it, remembering the day he had slipped it onto Elena's finger, the promises they had made, the future they had planned that had been cut so tragically short. "Tell me about her," Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. "Tell me about my Aunt Elena." "My mother never talked about her much, just said she went away to find a better life and forgot about us." The pain in her voice was like a knife to William's heart, and he reached across the table to cover her hands with his, feeling the warmth of the ring against his palm. "She never forgot about you," he said firmly, his voice thick with emotion. "Not for a single day. She carried pictures of you in her wallet, talked about you constantly, worried about whether you had enough to eat, whether you were doing well in school. She loved you more than you could possibly imagine." Grace's eyes filled with tears again, and she pulled her hands free to wipe them away, the gesture so achingly familiar that William felt his own eyes begin to burn. "Then why didn't she ever contact us? Why didn't she come back?" The questions tumbled out of her like water breaking through a dam, years of hurt and confusion finally finding voice. William took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would change everything, would shatter the careful walls Grace had built around her heart to protect herself from the pain of abandonment. "Because she was my wife," he said quietly, the words falling into the silence between them like stones into still water. Grace went completely still, her face draining of color as the implications of his statement sank in. "Your wife?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "But that's impossible. She was Elena Martinez, not... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, and William nodded grimly. "Elena Blackwood was the name she took when we married, but you're right. She was born Elena Martinez. She was your aunt, Grace. The woman who raised me, who gave me Lily, who died in my arms 3 years ago, was your family." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm, connecting two worlds that had been kept apart by secrets and silence. "I don't understand," Grace said, shaking her head as if she could deny the truth through sheer force of will. "If she was married to you, if she was living this life, why didn't she help us? Why didn't she bring us here? My mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, and we never knew." Her voice broke, and William felt his heart shatter at the anguish in her tone. "She did help," he said gently, pulling out one of the bank statements from the investigator's report. "Look at this. Every month, for 7 years, she sent money to your mother. Not much, because she was afraid I would ask questions, but enough to help. She was trying to find a way to bring you here, to tell me about you, but she was scared." Grace stared at the document, her fingers tracing the numbers that proved her aunt's love, and William watched as understanding dawned in her eyes. "She was scared of what you would think," Grace said slowly, "scared that you wouldn't accept her family." The truth of it hit them both like a physical blow. The tragic irony that Eleanor's fear of rejection had kept a family apart when love could have brought them together. The coffee shop around them seemed to fade away as they sat in the weight of this revelation. 2 people connected by a woman who had loved them both, but had been too afraid to bridge the gap between her 2 worlds. Grace's tears fell silently now, not the sharp tears of shock, but the deep, cleansing tears of grief, finally finding release. "She's really gone?" she asked, her voice small and broken, and William nodded, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. 3 years ago. Cancer. She fought it as long as she could, but in the end... He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the memory of watching Eleanor slip away from him, taking all her secrets with her to the grave. "I'm so sorry," Grace whispered, reaching across the table to take his hand, and the gesture was so generous, so full of compassion despite her own pain, that William understood why Eleanor had loved this family so much. In that moment, sitting in a small coffee shop, with tears streaming down both their faces, William knew that Eleanor's greatest gift hadn't been her love for him, but her love for the family she had never stopped trying to protect. The silence that followed Grace's tears felt sacred, as if the very air around them had been consecrated by the weight of truth, finally spoken. William watched her face as she processed everything he had told her, seeing Elena's strength emerge in the set of her jaw, the way she straightened her shoulders despite the emotional storm raging inside her. The ring on her finger seemed to pulse with its own light, a tangible connection to the woman who had loved them both, who had carried the burden of keeping two worlds separate until it had nearly destroyed her. "The ring," Grace said suddenly, her voice hoarse from crying. "She left it to me in a letter that came after she died. I never understood why a stranger would leave me something so valuable. But the lawyer said it was legitimate, that she had specifically requested I receive it." Her fingers moved to touch the golden band, and William felt his heart clench as he remembered placing it on Elena's finger on their wedding day. The promises they had made, the future they had dreamed of, that had been cut so tragically short. "It wasn't from a stranger," William said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "It was from someone who loved you more than life itself. Elena wore that ring every day of our marriage, and when she knew she was dying, she made arrangements for it to reach you. She wanted you to have something of hers, something that would connect you to the family you never knew you had." Grace's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were different, not the sharp tears of shock and grief, but the gentle tears of healing, of understanding finally dawning after years of confusion and pain. "She never forgot us," Grace whispered more to herself than to him. "All these years, I thought we meant nothing to her, but she never forgot." The wonder in her voice, the gradual acceptance of a love she had never known existed, made William's chest tight with a mixture of joy and sorrow. Eleanor would have been so proud to see her niece now, to see the strength and grace she had inherited, the capacity for forgiveness that ran in their family like a river of gold. "There's more," William said gently, knowing that what he was about to reveal would complete the circle that Elena had begun, would finally bring together the family she had kept apart through fear and circumstance. "Lily is your cousin, Grace. Elena's daughter is your blood, your family. That connection you felt with her, that sense of familiarity, it wasn't your imagination. She's your family." Grace's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with amazement as the full implications of this revelation sank in. "Lily," she breathed, "that beautiful little girl is my cousin, Elena's daughter." The joy that bloomed across her face was like sunrise after the longest night, transforming her features with a radiance that took William's breath away. "She has a family," Grace continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "She has someone who shares her blood, who can tell her about her mother's family, who can love her the way Elena would have wanted." The fierce protectiveness in her tone, the immediate acceptance of responsibility for a child she barely knew, reminded William so powerfully of Elena that for a moment he could barely speak. "She needs you," William said, his voice rough with emotion. "We both do. Lily has been asking about you since yesterday, talking about the kind lady who helped her eat, and I think on some level she sensed the connection between you. Children often know things that adults miss, feel bonds that logic can't explain." Grace nodded, tears streaming down her face again, but these were tears of joy now, of possibility, of a future that had suddenly opened up before her like a door she had never known existed. "I want to see her again," she said urgently. "I want to tell her who I am, want to be part of her life if you'll let me. I know I'm just a waitress. I know I don't have much to offer, but I love her already. I loved her the moment I saw her, and now I understand why." The humility in her voice, the assumption that her financial status might make her unworthy of a place in their lives, made William's heart ache with the injustice of it all. "You're not just anything," William said firmly, reaching across the table to take her hands in his, feeling the warmth of Elena's ring against his palm. "You're Lily's family. You're the connection to her mother's heritage that I could never give her. You're the answer to prayers I didn't even know I was praying." Grace's eyes searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or reservation, and finding none, she began to smile through her tears. "Elena would be so proud," she whispered. "She would be so happy to know that we found each other, that her daughter won't grow up alone, that the family she tried so hard to protect is finally coming together." The truth of it settled over them like a blessing. The knowledge that Elena's greatest fear, that her two worlds would never meet, had been transformed into her greatest gift. "When can I see her again?" Grace asked, her voice eager and full of hope. "When can I meet my cousin properly, as family?" William felt his own smile break through the tears, the first genuine happiness he had felt since Eleanor's death, flooding through him like warm sunlight. The coffee shop around them had emptied as the evening wore on, other patrons coming and going while they sat locked in their bubble of revelation and healing. But neither of them noticed the passage of time. They were too busy planning a future that neither had imagined possible just hours before, too busy marveling at the way love could reach across death itself to bring a family together. "Tomorrow," William said, his voice strong with certainty. "Come to the house tomorrow. Let me introduce you to Lily properly. Let her know that the kind lady from the restaurant is actually her family, that she's not alone in the world anymore." Grace nodded eagerly, her face glowing with anticipation, and William knew that Elena was watching over them somehow, finally at peace, knowing that her greatest wish had come true. The ring on Grace's finger caught the light one more time, winking like a star, and William understood that it wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a promise kept, a love fulfilled, a bridge between past and future that would never be broken again. The morning sun streamed through the windows of William's mansion as he prepared for Grace's arrival, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged Elena's photographs on the mantelpiece in the living room. Each picture told a story of the woman he had loved, but now they would tell a different story, the story of an aunt who had never stopped loving her family, who had carried their memory in her heart, even as she built a new life in a new world. Lily sat on the carpet nearby, playing with her dolls, completely unaware that her life was about to change forever, that the family she had never known existed was about to walk through their front door. "Daddy," she said, looking up at him with those bright eyes that were so much like Elena's, "is the nice lady from the restaurant really coming to visit us?" The excitement in her voice, the pure joy at the prospect of seeing Grace again, made William's heart swell with a mixture of love and anticipation. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, kneeling down beside her, "and I have something very special to tell you about her." The doorbell rang at exactly 10 o'clock, and William felt his pulse quicken as he moved to answer it, Lily's small hand tucked securely in his. Grace stood on the doorstep looking nervous but radiant, dressed in a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, Elena's ring catching the morning light on her finger. The moment she saw Lily, her face transformed with such pure love and joy that William felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Hello, beautiful girl," Grace said softly, kneeling down to Lily's level. "Do you remember me from the restaurant?" Lily nodded shyly, but there was something in her expression that suggested recognition on a deeper level, as if some part of her soul knew that this woman was important, was family. "You're the lady who helped me eat," Lily said, her voice soft but clear. "Daddy says you have something special to tell me." The trust in her tone, the complete openness of a child who had never learned to fear strangers, made Grace's eyes fill with tears. "I do have something special to tell you," Grace said, her voice gentle but strong. "Something wonderful about your mommy and about me and about you." She looked up at William, who nodded encouragingly, and then turned back to Lily with a smile that was pure Eleanor. "Your mommy was my aunt, sweetheart. That means we're family. You and I are cousins. The love you felt when we met, the way it seemed like we already knew each other, that's because we're connected by blood, by love, by the woman who brought us both into this world in different ways." Lily's eyes grew wide with wonder, and she looked back and forth between Grace and her father as if trying to process this miraculous information. "You're my family?" she whispered, and when Grace nodded, Lily threw herself into her arms with such force that they both nearly toppled over. "I have a cousin!" Lily exclaimed, her voice ringing with pure delight. "I have family like the other kids at school." William watched through tears as Grace held his daughter, seeing Elena in both of them, in Grace's gentle strength and in Lily's capacity for immediate, unconditional love. The ring on Grace's finger pressed against Lily's back as they embraced, and William knew that Elena was somehow present in this moment, finally seeing her two worlds come together in the way she had always dreamed, but never dared to hope for. "Tell me about my mommy's family," Lily said, pulling back to look at Grace with eager eyes. "Tell me about where she came from, about the people who loved her before she met Daddy." The hunger in her voice, the desperate need to understand her heritage, made William realize how much his daughter had been missing, how incomplete her sense of self had been without this connection to her mother's past. "I'll tell you everything," Grace promised, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll tell you about your grandmother Maria, who made the best tamales in the whole neighborhood, and about your grandfather Carlos, who could fix anything with his hands and who would have loved you so much." As the morning turned to afternoon, the three of them sat together in the living room, Grace sharing stories of Elena's childhood, of the family that had shaped her into the woman William had fallen in love with. She told Lily about Elena's dreams of becoming a teacher, about how she had worked multiple jobs to help support her family, about the letters she had written but never sent, full of love and longing for the niece she had left behind. With each story, Lily's understanding of her mother deepened, and William's understanding of his wife expanded in ways that were both painful and beautiful. He learned about Eleanor's fears, her struggles, her sacrifices, but also about her strength, her determination, her unwavering love for family that had driven every decision she made. "She sounds wonderful," Lily said softly, curled up between Grace and William on the sofa. "I wish I could have met her family, could have known about you sooner." The wistfulness in her voice made both adults' hearts ache, but Grace smiled and took her small hand. "We're together now," Grace said firmly, her voice full of conviction. "And that's what matters. Your mommy brought us together, even though she's not here anymore. She made sure we would find each other, made sure you would know about your family, made sure you would never be alone." She looked at William over Lily's head, and in her eyes he saw not just love for his daughter, but gratitude for the chance to be part of their lives, to honor Eleanor's memory by caring for the family she had left behind. "We're going to be a real family," Lily announced with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "Grace is going to come visit us all the time, and we're going to tell each other stories, and she's going to teach me about Mommy's family, and we're going to love each other forever and ever." The simple truth of it, spoken with such innocent faith, made both adults smile through their tears. As the sun set over the mansion that had once felt too empty and too quiet, William looked at his daughter and her cousin, his wife's niece, his family now too, and knew that Elena's greatest gift hadn't been her love for him, but her love for the family that would continue long after she was gone, bound together by a golden ring and an unbreakable promise that love never truly dies.